Good morning, Ann-Margret.
Good morning.
It's great to be able to talk to you face to face, and we're looking forward to having you come to our InScribe conference in September.
I'm really excited about it.
Great. So when did you first call yourself a writer?
That's a good question, because I struggled with that for a while. I had been freelancing for and being published for a few years before I was really comfortable using that word. I worried that, maybe it sounded pretentious, or that people would raise their eyebrows at me like, what do you mean you're a writer? And, there are people who sort of have this skepticism about whether writing is a real job. And so there's so much baggage involved with that word. But, after a few years and getting to know other writers and hearing about their journeys and affirmation from people, I finally started to feel comfortable with that. And I thought, well, this is what I'm doing. I am actually writing and getting paid for it. So it's okay to call myself a writer. And part of my hesitation was that I didn't have the formal education that some writers do in terms of, having a university degree in English or in journalism, or my journey to becoming a writer was a little bit unusual. And so I guess I had sort of this fear that people wouldn't really believe that I was a writer. But, like I said, I grew into it. I grew more comfortable with it and eventually stopped overthinking it.
So you said your journey was a little unusual. Can you just give us a brief summary of how you got into writing?
Well, when I was in high school, I was really into sciences. I did one of those career exploration tests that, sort of guide you into what you should go into, and clearly said, chemical technology. And so, I thought, okay, I'll go into chemistry. That's what I studied in college for a few years. But I realized at one point my heart wasn't in it. I wasn't doing that well. So I kind of had a bit of a crisis for a year as I tried to figure out, I thought I had my life figured out. What am I going to do next? And interestingly enough, my dad really encouraged me to look at the talents that I had in terms of writing and with the English language, and especially as, the daughter of immigrants, first generation Canadian. That's not a direction that I would have expected them to guide me in. But he saw something there. Even still, for a couple of years, I was still sort of looking around, trying to figure out what to do. And eventually by God's grace, obviously his intervention, I got a job at a very small magazine publisher. It was supposed to be a temporary thing, and I was just doing some typesetting and proofreading. But within 2 weeks, I knew that was the world I wanted to be in, the whole publishing world and working with magazines. And I still at that point, I wasn't thinking of becoming a writer, but at least I found, the area that I knew I belonged in. And that, so 4 years working there really gave me a sense of where my talents and skills lay. So.
Well, thanks for sharing. So it is, sometimes it's a process figuring out what God is calling us to do. So.
Mm-hmm.
So you worked with the magazine for a while. How did you get started with illustrating?
That came much later. Since childhood, I always liked doodling and crafts, and I've always had a little bit of an artistic bent, but to me, they were just hobbies. It really wasn't anything I pursued seriously. I kind of wish maybe I had, it would have been great if I had taken some art classes, but I really didn't see that as something I would ever use professionally. First of all, I didn't think I was good enough. And secondly, again, it was like, that's just something you do in your leisure time. It's not serious work. But several years ago, I came across a 30-day challenge. It was an art journaling challenge, and it just looked interesting. Someone had on her blog, she had this 30-day challenge where every day she gave you a prompt, and you could use, fabric or paper, pens, anything you wanted to sort of depict the theme of the prompt that she gave. And I really got into that. And I started to share my pages on Facebook. And then that led me to doing some more doodling. But again, it was just something I did on my own time, just for fun. And a few of my friends started to say, I really like your style. I can really pick out your drawings. Maybe you should do a coloring book. And I thought, well, okay, let's not exaggerate here. These are doodles. I'm not a professional artist. But, I kept sharing these doodles. And one of my editors, she had been the editor of one of my preteen devotionals when she was at David C. Cook, Multnomah. Her department was working on a multi-artist coloring book. And so they were trying to get illustrations from several different artists. And she really liked my work. So she actually invited me to participate in that project. So I sent her 5 drawings, and that went really well. In the meantime, my agent and I pitched a proposal to Tyndale to do a devotional coloring book. That really took off. Since then, I've some illustrations to a couple of other coloring books, and also illustrated a coloring book for breast cancer survivors that came out last year. So it's just something surprising that happened, almost 20 years into my career as a freelancer in my 40s, and I thought, who knew you could have so much fun in your 40s, doodling and creating coloring pages. And it's kind of been a fun surprise. The response to those illustrations has been really neat. I don't know how far that will go. It could just be, something I did for a while. It could be something that, more opportunities open up for that. We'll see.
Great. Well, I think it brings God joy when we use our gifts to his honor and glory.
Mm-hmm.
And he does surprise us every once in a while.
Yeah.
So how does your faith influence what you do?
I would say it completely influences my work. I think of myself primarily as a Christian, and I see my writing and my illustrating as tools to communicate what God has put in my heart. And it's those to me they're a means to an end. It's not, my writing and my illustrating are not the end. It's not that, those are not my ultimate goals. And so everything I do in my life, whether it's at church or in my neighborhood or in my family, is influenced by my faith. And so to me, it's only natural that my faith would also influence my job or
right.
the work that I do.
So Restore My Soul was on the Christian bestsellers list for 3 consecutive months, which is not easy to do. How do you work with your publisher or publishers to market your books?
Well, the nice thing about working with a traditional publisher, and that's been my experience so far, is that, they have, first of all, so much experience in marketing books, and they have a budget for it. And so now, mind you, one thing to keep in mind is that generally, because they have so many books that are coming out every year, they will only be able to dedicate so much time to marketing your book. So it may be 3 months or 6 months, depending on the publisher or depending on your book. But at least, for that time, that they are doing advertising, they may be setting up interviews, doing giveaways. And so it's really nice to have that support from these publishers who can do that. And then, but of course, I have to do my own marketing, and especially once their marketing program for my book is done, then I need to follow up and continue to do it. But that's been the nice thing about working with traditional publishers, who they know what, who to target, and they've got the advertising budget and connections with organizations that may be interested in the book. So, yeah.
So is there anything that you've struggled with that they've asked you to do to help market your books?
I wouldn't say that I've struggled with something that they've asked me to do. My struggle is more personal, in the sense that I don't have the personality that, I'm just out there promoting my book, talking about it on Facebook or on social media. I tend to be a little bit timid. I probably err on the side of, I don't want to bother people talking about my book all the time. And so I tend to, I err on that side. And I've had friends who have told me, no, talk about your book more. We want to hear it. And I've done the research on, book promotion on social media. And the publishers themselves have been really supportive and very creative in their publicity and marketing. So,
yeah, I think that's something a lot of writers struggle with, because we tend to be introverts, right, as writers.
Yeah, exactly.
So marketing can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else that you struggle with as a writer, and anything that's helped you with those struggles?
I think, the hardest thing to deal with at times is, doubts about how much of an impact are my books or articles having on the people who read them. And, should I keep doing what I'm doing? Does it make a difference? And I would imagine that that's probably, common among writers, and even after over 20 years of freelancing, I still have those struggles, especially if I'm working with a new client or, a new publication, and, the editor sends back revisions and I think, oh, am I actually good at this? Do I actually know what I'm doing? And then I have to stop and say, no, look, you've been doing this for a long time. God has given you opportunities to write. The same editor has come back to you 6 or 7 times. It's perfectly normal to have to do revisions, but, that inner voice is always there. And it's just, those doubts of, maybe I'm not actually good at this. But I think, that's because I'm focused so much on, the results, or I'm focused on trying to be the best or something like that. Whereas, I have learned that if I'm faithful in doing the work that's been given to me, doing my best, communicating what, like I said before, what God has put on my heart, working well with the editor, if my work is getting published, it may not be the best work out there, but, if God has opened that door, then I just need to faithfully keep doing what I'm doing and trusting the editor who has given me the assignment, trusting God to use it. And, maybe that article is only going to reach, 1 person or 10 people. And that's okay. That's none of my business. I just need to be faithful in my work. And that's really helped me. Just the idea of, as writers, we talk about submitting a manuscript. And I think the word submit is really significant because, so I try to remind myself that when I submit my manuscript to the editor, to also submit myself to God and to submit it to God. And to just, I've given it over and I need to just now rest. And if the editor comes back to me with revisions, or that's fine. But the end result of what I've written, I do try to just trust God with it. When I remember to trust Him, I have more peace, and then I'm free to just keep doing, what He's given me to do.
That's great advice. And I think it's something that we all have to choose to do. And that submission is not an easy thing for some of us, right? It's a constant battle.
Yeah.
Is there any other advice that you would give someone who's just starting out in the writing journey?
Well, in terms of the craft of writing, I think that it's important to balance confidence and humility. And I know that those sound like opposites, but we need enough confidence and courage to put our work out there, to send it to an editor or a publisher, put our thoughts on paper. And that does take courage, and there has to be, a certain amount of confidence to be able to do that. On the other hand, once you've done that, then you need the humility to be open to correction and direction. And that's been really important in my career, because I've also been on the editor's side of the table and work with writers. And unfortunately, oftentimes as writers, we're not open to correction. We're not open to someone saying, you know what, this would sound better like this, or just giving us some direction and some guidance. And the job of an editor is to make our work better. If we want to really excel in our work, that humility as well. I think talent is important, but it's not everything. Again, I think a major part of why I've been able to do what I'm doing for so many years is my willingness to listen and work with editors. So that's advice that I always give to younger writers, is just, be willing to work with editors, because they're actually your partner. They're there to help you. They're not the enemy.
They are our friends, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't get any credit for what they do. Their name doesn't show up on the article. Mine does, So in terms of the business side of writing, I think it's really important to be willing to invest in your career. I know too many people who are not willing to go to a writer's conference, or, to attend workshops or getting any kind of training. And I know that, especially when you're starting out, resources can be a challenge, but with some creativity, there are writers groups that you can join. There are libraries have lots of great resources, but one of the things that's really helped me is, going to conferences that either for professional development or for networking. I think both of those are important. And so, if you can't attend a conference this year, save up for it. Like, just at least be intentional and say, okay, as soon as I can get to this conference that I want to go to or take this workshop, I will, and to plan for that. I think that's really important.
And speaking of conferences, we're looking forward to having you as our keynote speaker this year. Can you give us a taste of what you're going to be sharing with us?
This might sound a little backwards, though, because, as writers, I think anyone in a creative field, there's this idea of dreaming big, but God has really been working in my life lately and talking to me about the value of small dreams and of leaning towards the things that I'm really gifted in and what is my calling. And I think sometimes there's so much pressure to have the best blog or to be the best writer or to have a best-selling book, and we're so focused on the end result that I think we sometimes miss out on what God really wants to do in our lives. And I think especially as Christian writers, we shouldn't lose sight of that. And even if we're not necessarily writing for the Christian market, I think it's really important to have a sense of how God is calling us. And I love that the theme verse, I believe, is Psalm 45:1 for the conference. And I just wrote it out for myself here. It says, "My heart is stirred by a noble theme as I recite my verses for the King. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer." Whatever noble theme God presses on our hearts, I think we need to be true to that. Again, it's easy to get caught up in the comparison game and focus on results and numbers and the type of impact we're having. And I've driven myself crazy, trying to figure out how can I be more successful, and losing sight of the fact that, my first priority should be to seek God's kingdom and trusting that, as I submit to him, he will use me in ways that I can't even imagine. And so that's some of what I want to convey to those who attend the conference. I hope that's not disappointing, that I don't have some secret formula for becoming, a super successful writer. But, there's lots of information out there on how to, being a social media ninja or whatever, but I think I can offer something a little different.
That's great. That's actually some of what God's been speaking to me about lately too, is figuring out my calling and focusing on one thing at a time instead of being pulled in 100 different directions at once and not making any progress in any of them. So I can't relate.
We can't do everything.
No, we can't. And we have limited time and limited abilities. So we have to take that into consideration and say, okay, God, you made me unique. So show me how you want to use my unique abilities to reach people that you want me to reach. And God doesn't call us to reach the whole world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. So I was thinking, we all have different paths as writers, and I've been freelancing for over 20 years. And while I've experienced, some success, again, how do you define success? Someone might say, well, your coloring book was on the bestsellers list for 3 months in a row. That's pretty good. But, so maybe compared to other writers, that seems successful, but compared to many other writers, that's nothing. That used to bother me, as I've gotten into my 40s and I see younger writers coming up and now in an age where, we have the internet and blogs and social media, things that were just starting to become tools when I started freelancing, and I see, young writers becoming really successful and popular. And it used to sort of catch me off guard at first. And that whole comparison thing, I think. Right. And, as I've looked back over my journey, I said, maybe I've had a slower journey than some, but it's been my journey, and God has, taught me things along the way, and maybe my progress has been slower than others, or maybe it's been faster than others. It doesn't matter. It's just being open to God's leading, and I think that the things I've learned along the way have shaped me, not only as a writer, but as a person. And And so the thing that I try to remind myself all the time is that I don't need to be the best, I need to be my best. And I think when we can make that distinction, it really makes a difference in how we approach our work and our writing. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing with us, Ann-Margret, and
Oh, it's my pleasure.
we are looking forward to September, and we'll see you soon.